Hello, welcome, and thank you for tuning in to episode 2 of the Defend and Carry podcast, your weekly round of news for personal defense and the culture of concealed carry lifestyle. Today on the show, we continue our conversation with good guy with a gun, Aaron Kreag, who, in the midst of a 6-lane highway on the day after Christmas, had to draw his concealed firearm to save the life of a complete stranger. I'm your host, Rob Russo. We got one in the chamber. Let's get started. Thanks for tuning in to the Defend and Carry podcast. Last week, we started our interview with Aaron Kreag, and we have the continuation today. So here is part 2 of our interview with good guy with a gun, Aaron Kreag. They cuffed you and they put you in the car. Now, let's go back a minute here. When you initially got out of the car, I'm sure your first thoughts were immediately on the woman's safety. But did you think at the time how it was eventually going to play out? I mean, that the cops would show up because, one of the things is that a lot of people face today when they conceal carry or when they go out with their gun, the opportunity is there to defend themselves and to defend others. But, you draw that weapon and police are going to get involved. That's just unfortunately or fortunately the way that our society works is, you draw a weapon on somebody and the police are going to have to investigate and get involved in the situation. So did that deter you at all? I mean, obviously you got out, but did it ever cross your mind as you were exiting the vehicle and drawing your weapon that, this isn't going to be something that is going to just end in 5 minutes, but this is something that, I'm going to have to talk to police about, potentially lawyers about. Did that cross your mind at all?
It did not. It was so fast. After the fact, it kind of dawns on you like, oh my gosh, what in the world did I just do?
Right.
But at that moment in time, it was, if you go to training, right, and you get into those discussions about, shoot, no shoot scenarios and, appropriate use of force and, that kind of stuff. And, I think the odd thing here was that the decision to act and the decision to draw the firearm was made instantaneously, right? I mean, it was like, this is a deadly situation, firearm is appropriate, go, right? Like just boom, and, it's, as far as dealing with, media and law enforcement, attorneys, and all this stuff. I had never done that before. I had never really considered it before. In fact, you go around, you carry. There's people that have a CHL and they carry, and they'll never draw their firearm in their entire life.
Right.
Right. So it was just never. It's never been something that I've really thought about. I had always thought that, I'm a good guy. I've got a clean background. I've got extensive training. You know what? This was the right thing to do. I would do it again. I didn't lose any sleep that night. And so I just kind of hope that, that truth and justice prevail and that,
well, fortunately,
I could, come out the other side.
Yeah, fortunately, it's been documented. There's video, and the fact that the police released you on scene, I think, certainly bodes well for the fact that they recognize that you did the right thing. Now, we talked about the aggressor now and how he reacted when you pulled the gun out and the situation that you had with him. How about the victim? When you drew your firearm and you began yelling commands at the aggressor here, you've obviously explained how he reacted. How about the woman? What was her initial reaction to hearing you order commands? Was she conscious? Was she able to do anything?
Yeah, she was continuing. She did not move from the position that she was in the car. And she, throughout this entire thing, was wailing, crying, screaming and carrying on through the entire, from the time that we were pulling up on scene with the window down and she was getting, battered, through this entire thing. She was, reacting emotionally the entire time. I did not hear her say anything. She did not get out of the car. She did not move from the passenger seat. In hindsight, I wish that I would have instructed her to exit the car and go and sit in my car with my wife.
Right.
But it's one of the, you don't train for it. You got to think on the fly, and there was so much going on and so much stimulus that, sometimes I sit back and I'm like, gosh, I'm surprised I kept it together as well as I did.
Right. Well, now, did you have contact with her after the ordeal was over? I mean, did you get a chance to meet her afterwards?
Yeah. So, it took law enforcement probably half an hour to kind of fully process the scene and sort everything out. And I had gotten my firearm back. One of the officers had came and said, "Hey, he said something to the effect of, hey, it's a little awkward for me to give this back to you right now here in the parking lot, because they moved everything off the roadway into the retail parking area to kind of clear the road." But yeah, he was like, "Yeah, it's a little awkward for me to give this back to you right here in front of everybody," and he's like, "So can you just give me your car key and I'll go and put your firearm and your magazine in your trunk for you, and you can get it whenever you're through here." And so I was like, "Cool." So I gave him the keys, and he was like, "Oh yeah, by the way, all 8 rounds are in your magazine still." And he was really cool.
Good.
And then we were sitting around shooting the breeze with the officers. My wife's kind of a chatty Cathy, so she's over there cracking jokes and carrying on with some of the police officers that were there. But at a certain point, I had gotten this overwhelming urge to kind of make some type of closure, and I wanted to at least say hello to her.
Yeah.
I just felt it was traumatic for me. It was traumatic for her, and I'm a Christian guy, and I don't know. I just felt this overwhelming need to at the very least go and say, "Hello, my name is Aaron, and I'm glad you're okay." And I didn't want her to leave. I didn't want to leave and then have her leave and either wonder who I am or wonder, am I the boogeyman, or that kind of thing.
Right.
Am I some crazy, super right wing, nut job with a gun?
Well, despite how it turned out, I mean, you did essentially, put your life on the line because you had no idea how this gentleman would react. You didn't know if he had a weapon, so you certainly risked a lot to help her. And I'm sure anybody in that situation would like to meet the person that they laid it all out on the line for.
Yeah, and what's cool about it is, well, I went to one of the officers, so I was standing with 2 or 3 guys, 2 or 3 officers, and I turned to him and I said, "Hey, I'd really like to meet her and at the very least say hello. What do you think about that? Would that be acceptable?" And a couple of them kind of chuckled, and one of them was like, "That's a strange request. I've never heard that before, but he's like, we don't really see anything wrong with it. So if you want, go ahead." And my wife and I walked over to where she was. She was still in the vehicle, and we walked over there, and there was an officer standing next to the car, and he sees me. He smiles and nods, and then he opens her door. Or no, I said to him, "Is there any way that I could have a brief conversation with her?" And so he smiles and nods and opens the door and says, "Ma'am, would you like to meet the man that saved your life? And so,
Wow.
you know, and so,
It's quite the introduction.
yeah, exactly. Like, how do I live up to that, right?
Right.
And so he had opened up the door and said that to her, and she was still in there crying. I could hear her outside the car. And anyway, she looks over her right shoulder out the passenger side door at me and jumps out of the car and like kind of does a 3-step leap into my arms. And so I stood there and we embraced, for lack of better terms, for I don't know, half a minute, maybe a minute, but she said thank you a few times and was crying all over my shoulder. And I told her I'm glad everything worked out okay, and that that I'd be praying for her and that I hope things got better. And she was pretty gracious, thank you and that kind of thing. And so and then we ended up saying goodbye, and my wife and I went on our way, and she got back in the car. So
Well, that must have been, a pretty good closure, as you mentioned, to the incident, to be able to see her and talk to her and get a chance to meet her and her to express her gratitude for what you had done for her. Did you ever learn, and again, if this is something that you can't talk about because I'm sure this legal issue is still pending with this gentleman, did you ever learn what caused him to start attacking her?
no, I had asked, and nobody told me.
Okay. So
Yeah.
well, for whatever whatever it was that caused him to do that, certainly it was beneficial for her that you happened to be driving by that day, because it didn't seem like, as you had mentioned, there was a lot of traffic, a lot of cars. Nobody else seemed to want to stop and help her. So, fortunately, you were there at that time and moment to help her out. Now, how long have you been handling firearms, and what other experience have you had prior to this incident with weapons?
Well, I was in the Army for 8 years, and then I worked over in Iraq for a few years as a security operative and tactical paramedic on a high risk security team. I've got some civilian, armed security experience, executive protection stuff. I'm all licensed here in Texas, as a armed security guard, and also licensed as a personal protection officer, and got a handful of instructor credentials, the NRA stuff, and Texas concealed handgun instructor credential.
So,
Yeah, I do some competitive shooting on the amateur level.
I think from everything you've explained, I would say by the average American standard, you're a very well qualified person to handle a firearm. You certainly have experience in lethal situations, at least trained to be, and I think that training was on display during this incident. And on that note, we're going to take a quick break and come right back.
Tired of overpaying for one concealed carry holster after another that is flimsy, hard to hide, or just plain uncomfortable? At Alien Gear Holsters, less than $30 gets you a professional quality holster that's super stealthy and ultra comfortable. Every Alien Gear holster is backed by a forever warranty, a 30-day test drive, and free shell trades for life in case you buy a different gun. AlienGearHolsters.com. AlienGearHolsters.com.
One of the things that we see in the news a lot are people who are licensed to carry firearms. There's a certain protocol that kind of goes unwritten, or is at least spoken about amongst individuals who carry firearms in public, concealed and whatnot. And you talked about it, about the use of appropriate force. And I think sometimes we see when people find themselves in a situation and they haven't really trained for it, because you can never really train for situations where your life may be in jeopardy. They use force perhaps when they didn't need to, and they find themselves in trouble. and it also, unfortunately, creates a bad situation for gun rights and for other people who want to carry weapons with them and concealed. But what you did, which is why I think it's so important for everyone to hear the story, is that you assessed the situation. You saw that there was a threat, not necessarily to yourself, but to someone else, and you used the appropriate amount of force, which essentially was, the threat of violence. You showed the aggressor your weapon and just asked him basically to stop doing what he was doing and hold him there till police arrive. And I think that's something that a lot of people in that situation, might have trouble doing, because it's I don't need to tell you how tense and stressful it was and how time moved, at a different pace. But the restraint that you showed and the proper use of your firearm is really important to highlight here, because in the end, nobody was killed. The woman fortunately lived, and a firearm and a good guy with a gun, so to speak, saved the day, which is the kind of story that we want to hear, and we want to, share with other people that, firearms aren't necessarily dangerous when they're in the hands of people who are responsible. And you showed incredible amount of responsibility that afternoon, which is why I think, the story is so important for people to hear.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think one important thing to point out is, you guys have listeners all over the country, and, post-incident, I had kind of perused the internet just a little bit, and you catch some stuff on forums, you catch some stuff on commentary here and there on, blogs or Facebook or whatever. And one thing that did kind of stand out to me was that, across the country, the laws are vary greatly, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to point out that here in Texas, the use of a firearm in defense of a third person who's the victim of a felony, is completely legal. I know in some states it's, hey, you can only draw your firearm if you're being directly threatened with immediate deadly threat, or that kind of thing. But so I just want to put it in context, like, hey, I know there's some people out there like, oh, that's, that wasn't legal, or that was this or that. I just want to make sure that people know that, hey, check the laws in your state, and do know that in Texas that's legal, and we kick ass here.
Well, I can't imagine that anyone outside of someone being very ardent and hardcore, anti-gun, could see any wrong in what you did. And I think even the casual American who maybe is even on the fence about whether or not guns are good or not realize that what you had done, and the fact that you had a gun and a firearm available to you did save this woman's life. So common sense, I think, prevails here and says that good guy with a gun, so to speak, managed to save the day, because who knows what could have happened if you didn't stop, or if you stopped and you didn't have a weapon. I think perhaps the gentleman who was, I say that word loosely, but this aggressor may have had the courage to get out of the car if he didn't see the person who was telling him to stop, have a firearm. So, you've spoken about the laws in Texas and in other states, and right now there is a big debate going on in Texas about open carry and constitutional carry and where you can carry. It seems to be one of the hotbeds of news related to gun rights going on right now. How do you feel about the idea of constitutional carry, which is essentially the idea that anybody can conceal carry without needing a permit, without needing any kind of licensing? Do you think that's a good idea, or do you think that people, in order to carry on their body outside of their home, should be, receive some kind of licensing beforehand?
Wow.
If you want to plead the fifth on that one, that's okay. I understand.
Wow. Gosh. So I'll say a few things. um, there's a couple thoughts. One is, I would be a huge fan if the state of Texas changed their concealed handgun laws to basically say, hey, look, you go through the training, you get vetted, you get your CHL, and you could carry your gun anywhere, anytime, with zero limitations on geography or facility or whatnot. That's a huge thorn in my side. I'm trained, I go visit my son at lunch at school, and I got to take the firearm out, secure it in the car, then go into the school. Or, I want to go visit somebody at the hospital, I got to put the gun away. And, so, I think personally, I would have preferred that the energy on the legislative side was spent first strengthening or broadening our CHL rights in the state of Texas. Now, regarding open carry, I don't really have an opinion. I could tell you that, I don't necessarily see a need for it. I wouldn't necessarily open carry myself. I just really don't think, I would rather them say, loosen up the CHL rules so that I could wear a T-shirt with a pair of shorts and, you see the grip of my firearm concealed and I won't go to jail. That kind of thing. I want to, but I'm not going to be walking around with a, you see it in Oklahoma when they passed open carry. You got guys walking around with, thigh rig holsters,
right?
And all this nonsense. And personally, I just don't see the need. I think it's in order for somebody to throw on bilateral fire rigs and go out to McDonald's. I think it's overkill.
Well, Texas, certainly remains one of those states that gun rights are a proud heritage. So it'll be interesting to see how over the next few weeks and over the new governor's tenure, whether or not he comes through on some of the promises he made during the campaign, but also, whether or not he expands even further on some of the demands that gun right activists in Texas are asking for.
The gun right activists here, I think there's a certain segment of that population is basically ruining things for everybody. I mean, I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to name group names. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right.
Just because I've got the freedom of speech and I can walk up to Joe Blow over here at my daughter's gymnastics center and tell him, I don't know, he's an overweight, ugly slob, right?
Right.
Just because I've got that right under the Constitution to do that doesn't mean that I should. And that's my position with that whole thing, is that just because you can wear 2 long rifles and go into Chipotle does not mean you should.
Yeah.
I mean, and really, in all honesty, it does nothing it doesn't further the cause. All it does is just alienate them and make everybody else think like, oh, those constitutional carry guys or open carry guys are out there in left field somewhere. So, I just think there's a much more tactful, a much more pragmatic way to win this argument and pass this legislation and expand gun rights in the state of Texas. I just think that the people that are like-minded, like myself, the people that are a little bit more like, hey, we can get a little bit more here with honey. We can get a little bit more here with diplomacy, and we can get a little bit more here with not this big, huge kind of grand show, if you will.
Right.
I just think those people they're sitting back, right? They're not coming together as a group. They're just kind of sitting back, and I don't know. I almost seem to think that.
Well, There's one question here that I know a lot of people are probably wondering about, and that is, what is your carry firearm? What is it that you carry with you every day, and is this the same firearm that you used on December 26th?
Oh yes, so I'm a huge Heckler and Koch fan.
Okay.
And yeah, my carry firearm is the H&K 45 Compact.
Okay.
Yeah, and my wife carries the same one. So yeah, we're a big Heckler and Koch family.
Excellent. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of H&K fans out there who are happy to hear that. Now, our sponsor, Alien Gear Holsters, they want to make sure that you guys get some new holsters for your H&K weapon. So we'll talk to you off the air, and we'll make sure to get your information. But they want to send you a holster for yourself and your wife for your H&K. And I don't know if you've ever used an Alien Gear holster or not, but I think when you get them, you'll love them. And hopefully you'll check in with us and let us know what you think once you get them.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, definitely looking forward to it.
Do you have before we go, I want to ask if you have a website or a project or anything that you might have wanted to plug and talk about before we go, and let people know what you're doing and what's going on.
Gosh, I've got a few things. I use Facebook incessantly.
Okay.
So, I'm the only Aaron Kreag on Facebook with the spelling, that I have. So,
and so for those who do want to find you on Facebook, it's your last name is Kreag, correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
First
so
name Aaron, Aaron, and last name is Kreag.
Okay, pronounced Craig, but so there's no confusion there. They'll know how to find you. Well, Aaron, hopefully, we'll stay in touch, and as you continue to develop your websites and is this Facebook community group that you're building, and we can get you back on. We can talk about that. And like I said, we have to have you back because we want to know how you like the new holsters when they arrive and what you think of those. So, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Thank you for being that good guy with a gun and saving that woman's life. And we appreciate your service to the country, the military, and everything else you've done.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
All right, well, thank you for joining us, Aaron, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. Join us again next week for your weekly round of news on personal defense and concealed carry. Are you looking for a quality holster that lasts and is made in America? If so, check out Alien Gear Holsters. Their concealed carry holsters are the most comfortable and concealable holsters, hands down. Learn more at aliengearholsters.com. And as always, defend and carry.